Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we're pulling out our investigative tools to explore a surprisingly powerful corner of the tax world, IRS Form 843.
Hmm.
Now, if the idea of another tax form makes your eyes glaze over, stick with us.
Yeah, I get that feeling.
Right. But this isn't your everyday income tax return. This is a specialized key designed for very specific locks. And for those who know how to use it, well, it can unlock significant refunds or waive certain penalties and interest.
Indeed. Most of us focus on filing our annual taxes, maybe just getting that done. But what happens when you suspect an overpayment, or maybe you've been hit with a penalty or interest that just doesn't feel right?
Exactly.
Form 843 is precisely the tool for these nuanced situations. It's about correcting specific errors, really, rather than general filing.
That's the mission today, to unpack Form 843, understand its incredibly precise purpose, and show you exactly when it becomes your go-to strategy for recouping funds or, challenging IRS assessments. Think of it less as a dusty government document and more as a detailed instruction manual for reclaiming what's rightfully yours. So, let's dig
Yeah.
in.
Okay, let's start with the fundamental question. When we talk about refund or abatement with Form 843, what exactly are we referring to? Because it's definitely not for everything, is it?
No, absolutely not. And you've hit on the critical distinction right away. Form 843 is, it's a precision tool, not a general purpose hammer.
Okay.
It's specifically for claiming a refund or requesting an abatement of certain taxes, certain penalties, additions to tax, interest, and fees. What's fascinating here is its narrow, targeted scope.
How narrow?
Well, we're talking about correcting very specific types of overpayments or challenging equally specific assessments. So to give you a clearer picture, it's used for things like taxes other than your standard income, estate, or gift tax.
Got it. Not the big ones people usually think of.
Exactly. Imagine an employer who accidentally withholds too much Social Security or Medicare or even Railroad Retirement Tax Act, RRTA, tax from your paycheck.
If that employer won't, or, can't adjust it, Form 843 becomes your way to get that money back.
So it puts the power back in the employee's hands if the employer can't fix it.
Precisely. And the same applies if you worked for multiple railroad employers and your total Tier 2 RRTA tax withheld went over the annual limit. That's actually a common overpayment scenario.
Really? Multiple railroad jobs causing overpayment.
Yeah, it happens. Or maybe these taxes were simply withheld from your pay in error to begin with, perhaps because you're a non-resident alien not subject to them, and again, your employer can't correct it. Form 843 is the path.
So if your employer makes an administrative slip-up and isn't able to fix it directly, this form is your specific avenue for recourse. That's a powerful insight right there. What other common situations does it cover?
Well, beyond those specific employment tax overpayments, Form 843 is your best bet for challenging certain penalties and additions to tax.
Like what kind of penalties?
For instance, if you're assessed a penalty, but you can demonstrate reasonable cause for whatever the issue was, this form can be used to request an abatement.
Reasonable cause, that sounds broad.
It is, but it's a crucial category. And it even includes specific penalties like the 20% penalty under Section 6676 for an erroneous claim for refund if you can show reasonable cause. That can be a significant amount of money to recover.
Wow.
It's also the right form if you're disputing the trust fund recovery penalty or TFRP under Section 6672.
TFRP, what's that?
That's a serious penalty, usually related to a business's failure to pay over collected payroll taxes, like income tax withheld from employees.
Okay, serious business stuff.
Definitely. And moving down the list, you'd use it for refunds of penalties for misstatements due to incorrect appraisals, or maybe for the misuse of dyed fuel, things like that.
So it's really for these niche situations where something specific went wrong or a particular type of fee or penalty was assessed incorrectly. It's almost like a miscellaneous errors form for the tax world, but a very structured one.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it. And to round out the what it is for list, it's applicable if you're seeking relief because you received, get this, erroneous written advice from the IRS itself.
Wait, if the IRS gave you bad advice in writing?
Yes, under Section 6404F. It's a crucial protection for taxpayers. It's also the form for abating interest due to IRS error or delay, covered by Section 6404E1.
Okay, that makes sense. If they caused the delay, you shouldn't pay extra interest.
Right. And here's a really important one that highlights the IRS's nuanced approach. If you have a visual impairment or disability that prevented you from reading and timely responding to a standard IRS notice,
Mm-hmm.
you can use Form 843 to request an abatement or refund of penalties, interest, or additions to tax that resulted from that inability.
That seems really fair, an access issue.
It is. Finally, it's for refunds of specific specialized fees like the branded prescription drug fee or the annual fee on health insurance providers. There's even an other specified box, but really use that only if no other specific form is mandated.
That's a comprehensive look at what it is for. But you mentioned something even more important at the top. What is not for?
Yes. Critical.
This is where people often go wrong, right?
Right.
Using the wrong form and wasting valuable time. What forms should we absolutely not use Form 843 for? Because the key insight here, I think, is that using the wrong form, even for a valid claim, is like filing in the wrong court.
That's the perfect analogy.
It guarantees delays and likely rejection.
It absolutely does. This distinction is paramount, as using the incorrect form will, without a doubt, delay or outright reject your claim, leading to, well, immense frustration.
Okay, so what's on the do not use list?
You absolutely cannot use Form 843 to request an abatement of standard income, estate, or gift tax.
Okay, the big three are out.
Right. Nor can you use it for a general refund of income tax or the additional Medicare tax.
Got it.
For businesses, this form is not for adjusting or claiming refunds for FICA, RRTA, or income tax withholding you've reported as an employer.
Employer adjustments have their own forms.
They do. And crucially, Form 843 is not for amending a previously filed income or employment tax return. That's a huge one.
Okay, no amendments here.
And finally, don't use Form 843 for claiming refunds of agreement fees like installment agreement fees or offering compromise fees or lien fees. Those have different processes.
So if Form 843 isn't the right fit for these common situations, what forms are? Because navigating the correct IRS form can genuinely feel like a labyrinth. It's a huge strategic advantage to know the right path from the outset.
It truly is. And what's fascinating, actually, is that the instructions for Form 843 serve as a mini-map to the broader tax form ecosystem. They guide you directly to the correct alternatives.
Oh, that's helpful. So they tell you where else to look.
Yes. For instance, if you need to correct something on your personal income tax return, your Form 1040 or 1040-SR, 1040-NR, or maybe make certain elections after the original deadline, you must use Form 1040X. That's the amended U.S. individual income tax return.
1040X. Okay, that's the main one for individual amendments.
Right. And it's also your go-to for fixing additional Medicare tax liability. You'd attach a corrected Form 8959 to your 1040X.
So if I realize I forgot a significant deduction on my personal tax return from last year, I'm reaching for a 1040X, not an 843.
Got it. What about businesses or employers? Is there a similar X form for them?
Exactly. For employers, the rule of thumb is often an X form. If you're making an adjustment or claiming a refund for FICA, RRTA, or income tax withholding, you reported on, say, a Form 941.
The quarterly employer return?
Yes, you use Form 941X. Similarly, for Form 943, it's a Form 943X. For Form 944, Form 944, Form 945, Form 945X. And for the railroad one, Form CT1, you use Form CT1X.
Okay, an X for each major employer form. Makes sense.
They're specifically designed for amending those employer tax returns. And if you're a household employer, the one who used Schedule H with your 1040, you'd actually consult Publication 926 for guidance on corrections there.
That's a clear-cut system for employer forms. What about fuel taxes or other excise taxes? Those can be pretty specific. Great question, because excise taxes have their own set of rules, definitely. For claiming a credit against your income tax for certain non-taxable uses or sales of fuel during the year, or maybe for alcohol or biodiesel mixtures, you'd typically use Form 4136, the credit for federal tax paid on fuels.
Okay, 4136 for fuel credits on the income tax return.
But for a quicker refund of periodic excise taxes, rather than waiting for your annual income tax return, you can often use Form 8849, claim for refund of excise taxes.
8849 for faster excise refunds.
Generally, yes. It's typically for refunds that don't stem from adjustments to your reported liabilities, like maybe an overpayment on Forms 11C, the occupational tax for wagering, or 2290, the heavy highway vehicle use tax.
Okay.
And for direct adjustments to the liability you reported on Form 720, the quarterly federal excise tax return, for previous quarters, you'd use Form 720X.
Another X form.
Exactly. But here's a crucial note. Don't use Form 720X to change claims made on Schedule C of Form 720. Those are specific credits. For those excise tax refunds, you actually go back to Form 8849.
Wow. Okay, that's a twist. 720X for adjustments, but $88.49 for Schedule C refunds from the 720.
Right. And for wagering tax credits or refunds, you're looking at Form 730, the monthly tax return for wagers, or again, Schedule 6 of Form 8849.
It sounds like there's a consistent pattern. X forms for amendments, and 8849 often for general excise tax refunds. That's a helpful mental model.
It is, generally.
What about penalties that aren't specifically covered by Form 843, like those for tax preparers? You mentioned some penalties are covered by 843.
Yes, good distinction. For claiming a refund of penalties assessed against income tax return preparers or promoters, the ones they paid but believe were charged incorrectly, they would use Form 6118, Claim for Refund of Income Tax Return Preparer and Promoter Penalties.
Okay, a specific form just for preparer penalties.
And, just circling back, if you need to correct your additional Medicare tax liability because your wages or self-employment income changed, you're back to using Form 1040X and attaching that corrected Form 8959.
Okay, so a lot of specialized forms. What if your refund was used to offset your spouse's past due obligations? That isn't really a tax error, but it impacts your refund, right?
Right. That's a very specific and often frustrating situation. For that, you'd use Form 8379, Injured Spouse Allocation.
Injured spouse allocation.
Yes, it's for claiming your portion of a joint refund that was used to cover your spouse's separate past due debts, like child support or federal student loans.
Got it. And what about these quick refunds you hear about sometimes?
Yes. For certain quick refunds related to things like a net operating loss, NOL, carryback, or a general business credit carryback, individuals, estates, and trusts can use Form 1045, Application for Tentative Refund.
Tentative refund.
Yes, it allows for a faster refund process than waiting for a standard amended return like the 1040X. But, crucially, it has a specific one-year filing window from the end of the year the loss or credit arose.
So speed comes with a tight deadline.
Exactly, and corporations use a similar form, Form 1139, for their tentative refunds. Though individuals can also just opt for the regular Form 1040X in these NOL or credit carryback situations if they prefer, or if they miss the 1045 deadline.
So the overarching strategic takeaway here is that precision is absolutely paramount. Knowing which form to use is the first, most critical step to success.
Absolutely.
It's about not just identifying an error or a potential refund, but knowing the exact pathway to claim it. But once you've determined Form 843 is your go-to tool, who can actually file it?
Right. So you've landed on 843. Now who sends it in? This is where the process becomes personal and authorization is key.
Okay.
The most common scenario is when you, the taxpayer, file it yourself. Pretty straightforward.
Just fill it out and sign it, send it in.
Exactly. However, you also have the option to have an authorized representative do so on your behalf, maybe a CPA, an enrolled agent, or an attorney.
Can anyone just file it for me?
No. If you go this route, you must attach the original or a copy of Form 2848, Power of Attorney and Declaration of Representative, and it has to be signed by you.
Form 2848, the Power of Attorney form.
Correct. This form tells the IRS who your representative is and confirms they have your explicit permission to act for you on this specific tax matter. It's really all about protecting your privacy and ensuring the IRS communicates with the correct party.
That makes perfect sense. It's about proper authorization. What if the refund or abatement is for someone who has passed away? That seems like it adds another layer of complexity.
It certainly does. If you are filing Form 843 as the legal representative for a deceased taxpayer.
Like the executor of the estate.
Exactly. If you personally file their original tax return when they were alive, you need to attach a statement to Form 843 just confirming that you filed that return and that you are still acting as the decedent's representative.
Okay, a simple statement if you filed the original.
But if you did not file the decedent's original return, then you must attach certified copies of letters testamentary, letters of administration, or other similar official court documents. This proves your legal authority to act on their behalf now.
So court paperwork is needed if you weren't the original filer.
Yes, and in most cases involving a deceased taxpayer's refund, you'll also need to file Form 1310, Statement of Person Claiming Refund Due a Deceased Taxpayer, along with the Form 843.
Form 1310, another form number to remember.
It is. This is crucial for the IRS to verify who is legally entitled to receive that refund, preventing any potential disputes among heirs, for example.
But what about tax preparers? You mentioned representatives. Do preparers always sign the form if they prepare it for you?
That's a subtle but important detail. A paid tax return preparer who fills out Form 843 for you is legally required to sign the form in the designated space and fill in their identifying information like their PTIN.
PTIN, Preparer Tax Identification Number.
Right. They also must provide you with a copy of the completed form for your records.
Okay, paid preparers must sign and give a copy.
However, if someone prepares your Form 843 for you without charging a fee, say, a volunteer at a VDES site, or just a knowledgeable family member helping you out, they should not sign it as the preparer.
Oh, interesting. So free help doesn't sign.
Correct. This distinction is about clarifying who bears the legal responsibility for the accuracy of the prepared document. The paid preparer takes on that responsibility by signing.
All right, so you know who can file it yourself. An authorized rep, a legal rep for someone deceased, or a paid preparer.
Yeah.
Now, for the million-dollar question that often trips people up, leading to significant delays,
I know where you're going.
where do you send this thing? It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all mailing address, is it? Seems like a common pitfall.
You've hit on one of the most frequent points of confusion, definitely not one address. The filing address for Form 843 is highly specific and depends entirely on the reason you are filing the form.
Reason.
Okay. Sending it to the wrong IRS office or service center will cause significant delays in processing your claim. It could even push you past deadlines or simply result in the claim getting lost in the shuffle.
Yikes.
Yeah. So a little upfront research here saves a lot of potential headaches down the road.
This sounds like a minefield. Let's break it down by the reason for filing. Where does it go?
Absolutely. The first rule of thumb may be the easiest one. If you're filing Form 843 in response to an IRS notice you received.
Like a letter proposing an assessment.
Exactly. If it concerns a tax or fee, whether it's income, employment, gift, estate, or excise tax, your best bet is usually to use the return address printed on that specific notice.
Send it back where it came from.
Often, yes. This generally sends your claim straight back to the department or unit that issued the original assessment or inquiry. It's often the most direct route.
Okay, that's a good starting point. What about specific scenarios?
Right. For specific situations, there are dedicated addresses. If your claim for refund relates to an estate or gift tax matter, specifically involving Form 706 or Form 709.
The estate and gift tax returns.
Yes, you must mail it to a very specific unit. Internal Revenue Service at Land E&G, Stop 824G, 7940 Kentucky Drive, Florence, KY 410422915.
Wow, that's precise. Florence, Kentucky for E&G.
It is. Now, for claims related to the branded prescription drug fee, especially if you're responding to letter 4658, the address is Internal Revenue Service, Mail Stop 4921 BPDF, 1973N, Rulon White BLVD, Ogden, UT 842010051.
Ogden, Utah for BPD fee.
Got it. Similarly, if your claim relates to the annual fee on health insurance providers, often in response to letter 5067C, you send it to Internal Revenue Service, Mail Stop 4921 IPF, 1973N, Rulon White BLVD, Ogden, UT 84201. Looks like the same building, different mail stop.
Ogden again for the insurance provider fee. Mail Stop 4921 IPF.
Correct. Now, if your request is for that net interest rate of 0 on overlapping underpayments and overpayments we talked
The
about.
interest netting thing.
Yes. You send that request to the service center where you filed your most recent tax return. This requires you to, recall which IRS processing center handled your last major filing. Might be Kansas City, Ogden, Austin.
Okay, so check your own records for that one. Where did my last 1040 go?
Exactly. For non-resident aliens seeking a refund of Social Security or Medicare taxes withheld in error from pay not subject to those taxes, you'll need to consult Publication 519, U.S. Tax Guide for Aliens. It has the specific mailing address and lists any additional document requirements.
Club 519 for non-residents.
Right. And for claims related to Form 8300, that's the report of cash payments.
Yeah.
Over $10,000 received in a trade or business.
Yep.
The specific address is Internal Revenue Service, Rosa Parks Federal Building, P.O. Box 32621, Detroit, MI 48232.
Detroit for Form 8300 issues.
And finally, the catch-all for penalties or for any other reason not explicitly listed above in the Form 843 instructions. The general rule is to mail Form 843 to the service center where you would normally file a current year tax return for the specific tax to which your claim or request relates.
So where would I file this year's return for that type of tax?
Precisely. You'd find that address in the instructions for that particular tax return, like the 1040 instructions or the 941 instructions. It's like sending a letter to the right department within a massive organization. You have to target it correctly.
That's a remarkable level of detail on addresses. It really underscores the importance of reading those instructions carefully, maybe even highlighting the right address before you start.
Absolutely. And double-checking it.
It also highlights how crucial it is to have your records organized. But what about filing multiple claims or the timing? Can you send in one Form 843 for multiple issues, or is it strictly one form, one problem?
Good question, and it's a mix. Generally, the rule is you must file a separate Form 843 for each distinct tax period, or each specific fee year, or each different type of tax or fee.
One form per period per tax type.
That's the general rule. It helps the IRS compartmentalize and process each distinct claim efficiently. Imagine trying to explain three different unrelated issues on one form. It would just create confusion.
Makes sense. But you said it's a mix. Are there exceptions?
Yes, there are important exceptions. For instance, if you're requesting that net interest rate of 0 on overlapping tax underpayments and overpayments,
The vetting again.
right, you don't need a separate Form 843 for each individual period involved. You can consolidate that into one request if it's all part of the same overlap situation.
Okay, one form for the whole interest netting request.
And similarly, if an IRS error or delay caused by a single specific managerial or ministerial act somehow affected your tax assessments for multiple tax years or different types of tax.
Like one lost file messed up 3 years of returns.
Exactly, something like that. You can file just one Form 843 to request the abatement of interest for all affected periods or taxes. In these cases, you check all the applicable boxes on the form and provide one comprehensive explanation on line 8, clearly linking the issue back to that single IRS act.
So generally one form per issue, but with specific allowances for efficiency if the root cause is singular. That makes sense from an administrative perspective for both sides.
It does.
What about the time frame for filing? There must be a deadline, right? Or else people would be trying to claim refunds from like the 1970s.
Yes, absolutely. This is known as the statute of limitations, and it is critically important. It's a hard cutoff.
Okay, what's the general rule?
Generally, you must file a claim for a credit or refund using Form 843 within 3 years from the date you filed your original return, or 2 years from the date you paid the tax, whichever of those two dates is later.
3 years from filing or 2 years from payment, whichever is later.
Correct. If you miss this deadline, you may no longer be legally entitled to a credit or refund, regardless of how strong your original claim might have been. The door closes.
That's a big deal. So if you realize you overpaid a specific tax years ago, you need to be aware of that clock ticking. Act fast.
Acting quickly once you identify an issue is paramount, yes.
Are there any exceptions to this general 3-year, 2-year time frame?
Yes, there's a specific crucial exception we touched on earlier. Requests concerning an abatement or refund of a penalty or an addition to tax that resulted from erroneous written advice from the IRS.
The bad advice scenario.
Right. For that particular situation, the request on Form 843 must be submitted within the period allowed for collection of that specific penalty or addition to tax, or the period allowed for claiming a credit or refund of such penalty or addition to tax, whichever is later.
So its deadline is tied to the penalty's own life cycle, not just the original return filing date.
Exactly. It offers a slightly different, sometimes longer window specifically for that situation. For even more comprehensive information on all these periods of limitation, you can always refer to Publication 5556, Examination of Returns, Appeal Rights, and Claims for Refund. That's the detailed guide.
Pub 556 for the nitty-gritty on deadlines.
Good to know.
All right, we've navigated the what and the where of Form 843. Now, let's zoom in on the form itself. It looks like maybe a simple page, but every box holds significant power and potential for error, right?
Definitely. Precision is key.
What should we pay attention to right at the top, beyond just our name?
This is where we get into the tactical details. Right at the very top of Form 843, you'll see several checkboxes. These represent the main reasons for filing.
Okay.
You must check only one of these boxes to indicate your primary reason. This is your first critical step. It immediately tells the IRS the nature of your claim and helps direct it to the correct processing stream.
So pick one box only, like abatement or refund of tax other than income or a refund of excess Social Security.
Exactly. Checking more than one, or the wrong one, can confuse the system and lead to frustrating delays or even rejections right off the bat.
Got it. Choose wisely. Then name and address. Anything special there?
Well, after checking the right box, you enter your name. If this Form 843 relates to a joint tax return you filed with a spouse, you must also enter your spouse's name exactly as it appeared on that joint return. This helps the IRS accurately link your claim to the correct joint tax record. Don't forget the spouse.
Okay, match the names from the original return. And for identifying the taxpayer, what about the taxpayer identification number, the TIN?
Your TIN is fundamental. For individuals, this will typically be your Social Security number, SSN, or maybe an individual taxpayer identification number, ITIN.
SSN or ITI?
If you're filing Form 843 in relation to a joint return, you must include the SSNs or ITINs for both you and your spouse from that joint return.
Both numbers for joint claims.
Yes. And if an entity, like a partnership or corporation, is filing, they will use their employer identification number, EIN, instead. This is the IRS's primary identifier for tax accounts. Get it right.
Makes sense. What about the address? Any tips?
Regarding your address, a practical tip. If you move after filing your Form 843, it's crucial to notify the IRS of your new address. Don't assume they'll just find you.
How to do that?
Individuals should use Form 8822, change of address. Businesses or other entities should use Form 8822B for a change in business mailing address or responsible party. This ensures any correspondence from the IRS about your claim reaches you without delay.
Forms 8822 and 8022B for address changes. Good tip.
Also, for P.O. boxes, the instructions say only use one if your post office doesn't deliver mail to your home. And for foreign addresses, make sure to enter the city name clearly and complete all the lines, including the full country name. Don't abbreviate the country.
Okay, so getting those initial header details exactly right sets the stage for success. Now let's go line by line through the core of the form. Line 1 seems to start defining the specifics, right? The tax period.
Precisely. Each line builds upon the previous one, guiding the IRS through your specific claim and demanding precise information for accurate processing. Let's walk through them. Line 1, tax period. Here, you enter the specific tax period for which you're making the claim or request. This could be a calendar year, like 2023, a fiscal year if you use one, or even a particular quarter, like Q3 2023.
Be specific about the time frame.
Very specific. If your request is for a refund of a branded prescription drug fee, you'll enter the fee year as the beginning date. This pinpoints the exact time frame of the issue, which is crucial for the IRS to locate the relevant records. Line 2, dollar amount. This seems straightforward, but accuracy is paramount. You enter the precise dollar amount you're requesting as a refund or an abatement.
The exact amount you think you're owed or shouldn't pay.
Exactly. This is the sum you believe you should get back or should no longer have to pay. Double check your math here. Line 3, payment dates. If your claim is for a refund of payments you've already made, you need to list the date of each payment that contributed to the overpayment.
Dates you actually paid the money.
Yes. This helps the IRS verify when the money was received and confirm the overpayment amount. If you have numerous payments, maybe installment payments, you can attach additional sheets. Just make sure your name and TIN are on every extra sheet. Line 4. Type of tax fee. On this line, you check the appropriate box to indicate the type of tax or fee involved. Critical for directing your claim.
Like employment, estate, excise, fee.
Right. And here's the key nuance we mentioned. If your claim relates to interest, a penalty, or in addition to tax, you must check the box indicating the type of tax or fee to which that claim relates.
So link the penalty back to the original tax type.
Exactly. If you're asking for an abatement of a penalty connected to an employment tax issue, you'd check employment tax, not just penalty. And always do a quick mental check again. Is Form 843 really the right form, or should I be using one of those alternatives we discussed? Line 5, type of fee return. This line gets even more specific. You check the appropriate box for the type of fee or return, if any, that your claim relates to.
Exactly.
So if your claim relates to an individual income tax issue, maybe an interest abatement on your 1040, you would check the box labeled 1040. And remember, 1040 here includes other individual returns like 1040 SR or 1040 NR, or maybe check 706 for estate tax or 941 for employer's quarterly tax. This gives the IRS more context. Line 6, IRC section for penalty. This one's specific. If you're requesting a refund or an abatement of an assessed penalty, you need to enter the applicable Internal Revenue Code, or IRC, section number.
Where do you find that code section?
It's usually found directly on the notice of assessment or penalty notice you receive from the IRS. It might say something like, penalty under IRC section 6651 AA1. That code provides the specific legal basis for the penalty. Line 7, specific request checkboxes. This line has several checkboxes, A through D, that correspond to specific types of requests, mainly related to interest or penalties.
Like the ones we discussed earlier.
Exactly. For example, if you're requesting an abatement of interest due to IRS error or delay, you would check box A. If your request is for a penalty due to erroneous written advice from the IRS, you check box B. If it's about that net interest rate of 0, you might check box C.
And D if none of those fit.
Right. If A, B, and C don't precisely apply, you would check box D for other. This signals that your detailed explanation on line 8 will clarify the exact nature of your request. Only check one box here, the one that best describes your claim. Line 8, explanation and computation. Okay, this is arguably the most vital line on the entire form. This is the heart of your claim.
Where you make your case.
Absolutely. You must explain in detail your reasons for filing this claim or request. This isn't just a brief sentence. It needs to be a comprehensive, clear, and compelling narrative. Why do you deserve this refund or abatement?
And you need to show the math, too.
Yes. You also need to show your exact computation for the credit, refund, or abatement amount you entered back on line 2. This computation should clearly demonstrate how you arrived at that specific dollar figure. Show your work. Leave no room for guesswork.
So line 8 is where you lay out your entire argument, the why and the how much.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just say, I overpaid.
Yeah.
You need to show your work and explain why this form, this reason, applies to your specific situation.
Precisely.
What about supporting evidence? Because an argument without proof is just a statement, especially with the IRS.
Exactly right. This is where you provide the proof. If you need more space for your explanation or computation, which is very common given the detail needed, attach additional sheets.
And label them carefully.
Critically important. Remember to include your name and your TIN, SSN, ITN, or EIN on every single attached sheet. This ensures that all your documents stay together and are correctly associated with your claim. Don't let pages get separated.
Good advice. What kind of evidence?
You must attach appropriate supporting evidence relevant to your claim. This could include copies of IRS notices, canceled checks, proof of payment, detailed wage statements like your Form W-2, perhaps statements from your employer, or any other documentation that clearly substantiates your claim. Think, what would convince someone reading this?
Build a strong case file.
Exactly. The clearer and more well-documented your case, the smoother the process will likely be. And for certain specific requests, like that net interest rate of 0, you might also need to include a specific statement confirming that the periods identified for overlap have been used only once for such a request under Section 6621 fellow.
That's incredibly thorough. It sounds like the IRS really wants you to play tax detective, find the error, explain why it happened, and prove it wasn't your fault, or why you deserve relief.
That's a fair assessment for many of these claims.
Now, after all that meticulous detail, what about signing off on this? That's got to be a critical final step, right? Sealing the deal.
Absolutely. The signature is your affirmation. It confirms that the information provided on the form and any attachments is true, correct, and complete to the best of your knowledge and belief under penalties of perjury.
Penalties of perjury, so it's serious.
It's a serious legal declaration, yes. Getting the signature part right is paramount.
Who needs to sign?
If you are filing Form 843 to request a refund or an abatement relating to a joint return, then both you and your spouse from that related joint return must sign Form 843. One signature isn't enough.
Both spouses for joint claims.
Got it. For Forms 843 filed by corporations, the form must be signed by a corporate officer who is authorized to sign on behalf of the corporation, like the president, vice president, treasurer, etc., and that officer's title must be included with their signature.
Officer and title for corporations.
If the form is filed by an estate or a trust, it must be signed by the fiduciary, for example, the executor, administrator, or trustee who has legal authority over the estate or trust.
The fiduciary signs for estates trusts.
Correct. And finally, reinforcing what we discussed earlier about preparers, a paid tax return preparer who fills out Form 843 you must sign the form in the Paid Preparer Use Only section and provide their identifying information. They are also required to give you a copy.
Paid preparer signs.
But again, if someone prepares your Form 843 but does not charge you for their services, they should not sign in that section. The signature section effectively closes your case submission, confirming your responsibility for the information presented.
Okay, this is where the deep dive truly delivers, I think. We've covered the basics, but Form 843 really shines in these special situations where understanding the precise rules can lead to actual money back or penalties waived. These are the specific pathways to relief, the real tax-saving moments.
Or money-recovering moments.
Right, money recovering. Let's start with a situation that highlights the IRS's commitment to fairness, the one you mentioned earlier.
Yes, what's truly fascinating here is how the IRS provides specific, detailed avenues for a variety of unique circumstances. These aren't just obscure technicalities, they represent significant opportunities for individuals or entities to correct financial discrepancies or address errors. These directly translate into tax savings or, as you said, funds recovered. Let's start with taxpayers with visual impairments and disabilities.
Okay, the accessibility issue.
Exactly. The opportunity here is that you may be able to request a refund or an abatement of assessed penalties, interest, or additions to tax if you are genuinely unable to read and timely respond to a standard print IRS notice because of a visual impairment or other disability.
So it acknowledges a physical barrier to compliance.
Precisely. It's a crucial accommodation, recognizing that a disability can impede your ability to meet IRS deadlines, and it offers a path to relief that many might not even realize exists.
We need to show them. What goes in that line 8 explanation?
To qualify, your explanation on line 8 is absolutely crucial and must be very detailed. You need to clearly articulate. First, the nature of the disability that specifically prevented you from reading and timely responding to notices in a standard print format. Be specific about how it impacted your ability to engage with that notice.
Okay, explain the disability's impact.
Second, the exact date you received the standard print notice from the IRS and a clear description of that notice. What was it about? What form or tax period did it relate to?
Date and description of the notice.
Third, the date you actually learned of the issue described in that standard print notice. This could be later than the receipt date due to your disability, for instance, if a sighted person had to read it to you later or you needed assistive tech.
When you actually became aware of the problem.
And fourth, whether you had previously requested that the IRS provide that notice, or any previous notices, in an alternative format like Braille, large print, audio, or electronic file. If so, provide the date of that request and the specific format you requested. This demonstrates your proactive efforts to comply if you were aware of the option.
So showing you tried to get accessible formats helps.
It strengthens the case, yes. It shows the issue wasn't just ignored.
This really highlights the nuance of the IRS's approach, accommodating specific needs when it impacts compliance. It's not just about having a condition, but showing how that condition directly impacted your ability to respond. It's a pathway to genuine relief.
Exactly. It's a clear pathway based on a demonstrated impediment. Moving on, let's look at a very common overpayment scenario related to employment taxes, the refund of excess Social Security, Medicare, or RRTA tax.
The employer withholding too much.
Yes, this happens surprisingly often. It occurs when one employer withheld too much of these taxes from your pay throughout the year. And despite your efforts, that employer either will not or cannot adjust the overcollection themselves.
Why wouldn't they adjust it?
Maybe they've already closed their books for the year, filed their final forms, or the person who handles payroll is no longer there, or the company went out of business. It happens. This is a common administrative error that can lead to significant overpayments for an individual employee.
Okay, so what do you need to attach to Form 843 to get that money back?
To claim this refund successfully, you must provide specific documentation. First, try to get an employer statement. Ideally, you'll attach a statement from your employer. The statement should clearly indicate the amount of excess tax they withheld. It should also state any amount they may have already repaid or reimbursed you directly. And it needs to state any amount of credit or refund the employer has claimed themselves, or confirm that they have authorized you to claim the refund from the IRS. Crucially, the statement needs to confirm it supports your claim for the employee tax paid by the employer to the IRS. This prevents double dipping, where both you and the employer try to claim the same refund.
Okay, the employer statement is ideal. But what if you can't get one, they went out of business, or just won't cooperate?
Right. If no employer statement is possible and you genuinely cannot obtain one, you must attach your own detailed statement instead. This statement should provide the same information as the employer statement would have, but to the best of your knowledge and belief. And critically, it must include a detailed explanation of why you could not obtain a statement from the employer. You have to explain your efforts.
So, document your attempts to get it from the employer.
Yes. Show you made a good faith effort. And regardless of whether you have the employer statement or your own statement, mandatory attachment. You must attach a copy of your Form W-2 for the relevant year. This is your concrete proof of the amount of Social Security, Medicare, or RRTA tax that was actually withheld from your wages by that employer. Without the W-2, the IRS has no verifiable starting point for your claim.
These are classic aha moments, aren't they? Realizing you might have overpaid due to administrative reasons And there's a specific actionable path to get that money back. It's a real concrete money recovering insight.
It really is.
What about if you work for more than one railroad employer? You mentioned that briefly. Is there a similar overpayment scenario there?
Absolutely. That's a distinct sub-scenario. Excess Tier 2 RRTA tax, multiple railroad employers?
Tier 2 RRTA.
The scenario. This occurs when your total Tier 2 RRTA tax withheld or paid for the year exceeded the Tier 2 limit, specifically because you had more than one railroad employer during that tax year. There's a specific annual cap on these taxes, and if your combined earnings from multiple railroad jobs push you over that cap, you've likely overpaid.
Okay, multiple railroad employers hitting an annual limit. How do you fill out Form 843 for that? Is it different?
Slightly different, yes. Here's how. You'll complete line 1, tax period usually the calendar year, and line 2, dollar amount of the refund you're claiming. You can skip line 3, payment dates, because this isn't about specific payment dates, but rather hitting an annual limit based on total wages.
Skip line 3. Got it.
On line 4, checkbox A for employment tax. You'll skip lines 5, 6, and 7. Those aren't relevant here. On line 8, explanation and computation, you must clearly identify the claim as excess Tier 2 RRTA and show your detailed computation of the refund amount. This should demonstrate how you arrived at that specific figure based on your wages from the multiple employers and the annual limit.
Explain its excess Tier 2 RRTA and show the math on line 8.
Correct. And mandatory attachment. You must attach copies of your Forms W-2 for the relevant year to Form 843, showing the withholding from each railroad employer. For help figuring the exact excess amount, you can refer to the worksheet in Publication 505, Tax Withholding and Estimated Tax. It provides a step-by-step guide.
Pub 505 helps calculate the excess Tier 2 RRTA.
Okay. And very similar, conceptually, is the refund of Social Security or Medicare tax withheld in error.
Withheld in error. How does that happen?
The scenario. This applies when Social Security or Medicare tax was withheld incorrectly from your pay altogether. A common example is tax withheld from a non-resident alien's pay that isn't actually subject to these specific taxes due to their visa status or a tax treaty. It can also happen to other groups sometimes exempt from FICA.
So it shouldn't have been withheld at all.
Exactly. It could happen due to misclassification by the employer or maybe a misunderstanding of complex rules or tax treaties. Correcting this can represent a significant refund, as it's a direct overpayment that should never have occurred.
What evidence do you need for this one? Same as the excess withholding.
Pretty much, yes. The required supporting evidence is essentially the same as we just described for the refund of excess Social Security, Medicare, or RRTA tax. You'll need either that statement from your employer detailing the error and confirming they won't adjust it, or your own detailed statement explaining why you couldn't get one from them. And again, you absolutely need a copy of your Form W-2 to prove the erroneous withholding occurred.
Employer statement or your statement plus the W-2.
Yes. And if you are a non-resident alien making this claim, you should also consult Publication 519 again for any additional information specific to your tax situation, as there might be unique considerations or documentation needed for aliens.
These are clear, actionable steps for recovering money when administrative errors happen or specific limits are exceeded. It truly translates into money back in your pocket.
Next, let's talk about a potentially substantial penalty. The Trust Fund Recovery Penalty, or TFRP. This sounds serious.
It is indeed serious, and the process for requesting abatement or refund of a trust fund recovery penalty, TFRP assessment, involves a unique prerequisite. Okay, what's the scenario here?
The scenario. You're challenging a TFRP assessment. This penalty is imposed under Internal Revenue Code Section 6672, typically for the failure of a business to collect and pay over its trust fund taxes, usually employment taxes, like the income tax and Social Security Medicare taxes withheld from employee paychecks.
The money held in trust for the government.
Exactly. This penalty is often assessed personally against the individuals within a business deemed responsible persons who had the duty to collect, account for, and pay over these taxes and willfully failed to do so. It can be a very large amount.
So you're challenging that personal assessment. What's the unique condition for filing?
Condition for filing. What's particularly interesting here, and a crucial procedural step, is that to even file a claim for refund of a TFRP assessment for each applicable tax period using Form 843, the taxpayer must first pay a portion of the penalty.
Pay before you claim a refund. That seems backward.
It does, but it's a specific requirement for TFRP refund suits in court, and the IRS applies a similar logic administratively for Form 843 claims. It's not just a suggestion, it's a required upfront payment that demonstrates a commitment before seeking the full refund. Specifically, you must pay the portion of the penalty attributable to the unpaid trust fund taxes of either one employee, if the TFRP is based on employment taxes like FICA or withheld income tax, or RR. One transaction if the claim relates to a TFRP for certain collected excise taxes.
So pay the tax equivalent for one employee or one transaction first.
Correct. This prepayment condition signifies a unique procedural hurdle. It effectively shows the IRS your intent to genuinely challenge the assessment and potentially pursue it in court if denied, rather than simply filing a form to delay collection.
That's a really interesting prepayment condition, demonstrating seriousness before seeking the full refund. It's a mechanism for the IRS to maybe filter claims. Now, for a situation where the IRS might actually acknowledge its own error, this sounds like a powerful form of relief for taxpayers.
This next one is truly powerful, yes, and offers a specific form of relief based on IRS actions. Requesting abatement or refund of a penalty or addition to tax as a result of written advice.
The bad advice scenario again.
Right, the opportunity. The IRS actually has the authority, under Section 6404F, to abate or refund any portion of a penalty or addition to tax that was caused by erroneous advice that was furnished to you in writing by an IRS officer or employee who was acting in their official capacity.
So if you asked a specific question in writing and they gave you a wrong answer in writing and you followed it and got penalized.
That's the core idea. This is a significant form of relief, directly acknowledging that the IRS can make mistakes and taxpayers shouldn't be penalized for reasonably relying on incorrect official written guidance.
What are the catches? What conditions need to be met?
There are several key conditions that must be met. This is definitely not blanket relief. 1, you must have reasonably relied on that written advice. This means your actions were directly influenced by the IRS's guidance, and it was objectively reasonable for a person in your situation to trust and follow that specific advice.
Reasonable reliance.
2, the written advice must have been provided in response to your specific written request for advice. You can't just rely on general IRS publications, website FAQs, or verbal advice, or even written advice given to someone else. It had to be a direct, personalized written response to your specific written inquiry.
Had to be your specific question answered in writing.
3, the penalty or addition to tax must not have resulted from your own failure to provide the IRS with adequate or accurate information in your original written request for advice. If you left out key facts or gave wrong info, intentionally or not, this relief likely isn't applicable.
Garbage in, garbage out applies.
Basically, yes. You can find more detailed legal information on these conditions in Treasury Regulations, Section 301.64043.
Okay, assuming you meet those conditions, how do you request this on Form 843?
How to request. To make this specific request and secure this relief, you'll complete lines 1 through 4. If the penalty or addition to tax has already been paid, you need to clearly enter the date of payment on line 3. On line 6, enter the applicable Internal Revenue Code section for the penalty that was assessed from the notice. Crucially, check box B on line 7. This specifically indicates that your request is due to erroneous written advice from the IRS.
Checkbox 7B. Got it. What proof do you need to attach? This sounds like it needs solid proof.
Mandatory attachments. Yes, this claim requires specific documentation to back up your assertion. Without these, your claim will almost certainly be rejected. 1, a copy of your original written request for advice that you sent to the IRS. This proves you initiated the specific inquiry.
Your letter to them.
2, a copy of the erroneous written advice you actually received back from the IRS that you relied upon. This is your direct proof of their written error.
Their letter back to you.
3, the report, if you received one, like an examination report, of tax adjustments that clearly identifies the penalty or addition to tax and the specific items in your return relating to the erroneous advice. This connects their bad advice directly to the penalty you were charged.
Link the advice to the penalty. When do you have to file this by? Is it the normal 3-year, 2-year rule?
When to file. It's slightly different. This claim for abatement or refund of a penalty resulting from erroneous written advice will generally only be allowed if you submit the request on Form 843 within the period allowed for collection of that specific penalty or addition to tax, or within the period allowed for claiming a credit or refund of such penalty or addition to tax, whichever period ends later.
Tied to the penalty's timeline again.
Yes, it has its own statute of limitations tailored to the life cycle of that specific penalty assessment.
This is a great example of accountability, isn't it? where the IRS acknowledges its own written errors can be a basis for relief. That's a crucial point for taxpayers, that they aren't always solely responsible if the IRS provided bad guidance in writing. This is truly a powerful money recovering opportunity if you have the documentation.
Absolutely. It offers a very specific out for taxpayers in that narrow situation, and knowing about it can save you a significant amount. Now let's explore another type of relief related to IRS conduct, this time focusing on interest. Requesting abatement or refund of interest due to IRS error or delay under Section 6404EO.
Abating interest because the IRS messed up or took too long.
That's the idea, the opportunity. The IRS can abate interest if that interest was caused by their own unreasonable errors or delays in performing what they call a managerial or ministerial act.
Managerial or ministerial act, what does that mean? We'll get to that.
We will. But the point is, if IRS processing or internal actions, things not your fault, lead to significant delays, and thus more interest accrues on your tax debt, you might be able to get that unfairly accrued interest removed. It's about fairness when the delay is genuinely on their side.
What kinds of taxes does this apply to? All taxes?
Applicable taxes.
No.
This type of interest abatement relates only to specific types of taxes for which a notice of deficiency is required by law before assessment. This generally includes income taxes, generation skipping transfer taxes, estate and gift taxes, and certain excise taxes, specifically those under Chapters 41 through 44 of the Code.
Okay, income, estate, gift, and some excise taxes. What's not covered?
Non-applicable taxes. It is crucial to note that interest related to employment taxes, like payroll taxes reported on Form 941, or other excise taxes, those not in Chapters 41-44, cannot be abated under this specific Section 6404E.
No interest abatement for payroll tax delays under this rule.
Correct. If your interest accrual is on payroll taxes, this isn't your avenue for relief based on IRS delay. For more details on exactly which taxes are covered, you can consult Publication 556 again.
So if it applies to your tax type, how do you request it on Form 843?
How to request. To make this request, you'll complete lines 1 through 4. On line 3, you should show the dates of any payment you made of the interest itself, or the underlying tax liability for the period involved. You'll check box A on line 7. This box is specifically for abatement or refund of interest due to IRS error or delay.
Check box 7A, and what goes in the big explanation on line 8? This sounds like it needs a good story.
What to state on line 8, detailed explanation is key. Yes, your explanation on line 8 needs to be incredibly detailed and compelling to support your claim. This is where you really make your case for why the interest should be abated. You must clearly state, first, the specific type of tax involved. Example, income tax, estate tax. Second, when you were first notified in writing by the IRS about the deficiency or the payment due that is now accruing the interest you want abated. The start date matters.
When the clock started ticking, basically.
Third, the precise period for which you are requesting the abatement of interest. This means specific start and end dates for the interest you believe was unfairly caused by the IRS error or delay.
The window of unfair interest.
Fourth, the specific circumstances of your case. You need to detail the specific IRS error or delay that you believe caused the interest to accrue unreasonably. This requires careful reconstruction of events, dates, communications, or lack thereof.
Lay out the timeline of the error or delay.
And fifth, the reasons why you believe that the IRS's failure to abate the interest would result in grossly unfair treatment for you. This often involves explaining how the delay or error caused undue burden or financial hardship beyond what you would have otherwise incurred if they had acted promptly.
Why it's unfair to make you pay for their slowness or mistake. Okay, now back to those terms. Managerial act and ministerial act. What exactly do they mean in this context? Because you said the error or delay has to be in one of those.
Right. These definitions are key, and they're very precise IRS terms. Managerial act. This refers to an administrative act that happens during the processing of your case. It specifically involves either the temporary or permanent loss of records or the exercise of judgment or discretion relating to personnel management within the IRS.
Losing files or bad management decisions.
Kind of. But crucially, a decision regarding the proper application of federal tax law or other federal or state law is not considered a managerial act. So if an IRS agent simply made a judgment call on how the tax law applied to your facts, and you disagree with that legal interpretation, that's generally not grounds for this type of interest abatement. It's more about administrative bottlenecks or foul-ups.
Okay, so not disagreements about the law itself. What about ministerial?
Ministerial act. This term refers to a procedural or mechanical act that does not involve the exercise of judgment or discretion. It's something that happens during the processing of your case after all the necessary prerequisites for that act, such as required conferences or review by supervisors, have already taken place. Again, a decision regarding the proper application of tax law is not a ministerial act.
So more like a clerical error, something that should have just happened automatically but didn't.
Exactly. Think of it as a routine procedural step. Maybe a file getting lost in transit between departments after a decision was made, data entry errors, or just a significant unreasonable delay in simply moving a case along or issuing a notice after all the decisions have been finalized. It's about the process breaking down, not the legal judgment.
Okay, that distinction is important. Managerial is about lost records or personnel issues. Ministerial is about procedural breakdowns.
Right.
And what if one of these errors affects multiple years? Do you need multiple Forms 843?
Multiple tax years or types of tax. Here's another exception to the separate form rule. You can file only one Form 843 if the interest assessment resulted from the IRS's error or delay in performing a single managerial or ministerial act that unfortunately affected a tax assessment for multiple tax years or even different types of tax, as long as they're eligible for this abatement.
So one IRS blunder, multiple years of interest impact, one Form 843.
Correct. For example, if two or more of your tax years were under examination simultaneously and a single IRS administrative error, like losing your entire case file for a year, caused unreasonable delays that impacted the interest calculation on all of them, you can consolidate your abatement claim onto one Form 843.
How would you show that on the form?
In this case, you would check all the applicable tax type boxes on line 4, list all relevant periods on line 1, or explain in line 8, and then provide one comprehensive explanation on line 8, clearly linking the multi-year interest impact back to that single administrative act or error.
This is where understanding the specifics of IRS internal operations can really pay off. Identifying an unreasonable delay and being able to argue whether it was a ministerial or managerial act that could be the key to significant financial savings on interest.
It truly could.
It also highlights the importance of keeping really good records of all your interactions with the IRS, including dates, times, names of people you spoke with, and copies of correspondence. That's your evidence.
It truly is. Your documentation is vital for making these kinds of claims. Now, let's look at another opportunity for interest relief that many find confusing but is incredibly powerful for offsetting interest burdens. Requesting net interest rate of 0 on overlapping tax underpayments and overpayments.
The interest netting. Section 662 and on today. This sounds complicated but potentially very valuable.
It is, on both counts. The scenario. This is a powerful provision. It applies if you have paid or are liable for interest on a tax underpayment, meaning you owed the IRS money and were charged interest on it, and you have received or are due interest from the IRS on a tax overpayment, meaning the IRS owed you money, like a refund, and paid or owes you interest on it for the exact same period of time.
So you owe them interest, and they owed you interest covering the same days or months.
Exactly. To the extent these periods of underpayment and overpayment overlap for the same taxpayer, the law allows the IRS to compute the interest using a net rate of 0 for that overlapping period and amount.
So the interest charges cancel each other out for the overlap.
Essentially, yes, to the extent of the overlap. It cancels out the interest owed by one side with the interest owed by the other. It's like a tax credit specifically for your interest charges, helping you save money when you've had a complex tax history with both refunds due and balances owed occurring concurrently.
How do you request this net interest rate of 0? What are the mechanics on Form 843?
How to request. First, you must provide documentation to substantiate that you are indeed the taxpayer entitled to receive the interest due on the overpayment side of the equation. This confirms you're the correct party for both sides. On Form 843 itself, you actually leave line 1, tax period, blank.
Leave line 1 blank. Interesting.
Yes. Line 2, dollar amount, is optional here. You can enter an estimated dollar amount of interest benefit or leave it blank, as the IRS will ultimately perform the complex calculation based on the info you provide. You'll complete line 4 to indicate the type of tax involved. You can check multiple boxes on lines 4 and 5 if your claim involves different types of taxes or returns that were overlapping during the period. And importantly, you do not complete lines 3, 6, and 7 for the specific net interest rate request. They aren't relevant.
See lines 1, 3, 6, and 7. Okay. So line 8 must be carrying all the weight here.
What to provide on line 8? Extensive detail required. Absolutely. Line 8 requires highly specific and detailed information to allow the IRS to correctly identify the overlap and compute the net interest benefit. You must provide all of the following information. 1. The specific tax periods for which you overpaid and the periods for which you underpaid your tax liability. And remember, a separate Form 843 is not required for each separate tax period involved in this specific type of request. You can combine them if they relate to the same overlap situation.
List all the overlapping periods.
2. When you actually paid the tax, if the underpayment is no longer outstanding, proof of payment date. 3. When you received your tax refund, if the overpayment is no longer outstanding, proof of refund date.
Dates paid and dates refunded.
The precise periods that your overpayment and underpayment overlapped, and the exact dollar amount of the overlap for each overlapping period. This is crucial. You should also provide any relevant background material that helps explain the situation, such as copies of examination reports, relevant IRS notices, or prior interest computations provided by the IRS. Paint the full picture.
The exact overlap window and amount, plus backup docs.
5. A computation, to the extent you are able, of the amount of interest you believe should be credited, refunded, or abated as a result of applying the net zero rate. If you're unable to provide a precise computation, it can be complex, you must provide a detailed explanation of why.
Try to calculate the benefit or explain why you can't. How does the calculation work generally?
The computation should generally apply Section 66T1D to reduce your underpayment interest payable to the IRS. However, there's a twist. If, on the date you file Form 843, only the period of limitation for claiming additional overpayment interest is still open, meaning the underpayment side is closed, then you should make the computation by applying Section 6621 to increase your overpayment interest payable by the IRS. It depends on which statute of limitations is still open.
Wow. Okay, that determines whether you reduce interest paid or increase interest received. Complex.
It is. And one more point. Section 6621D specifically provides for this net interest rate of 0 for the same taxpayer. If your claim involves more than one taxpayer identification number, TIN, maybe a business EIN, and your personal SSN that are somehow linked for this purpose, you must explain clearly on line 8 why the different TINs can be treated as the same taxpayer under the relevant tax law for this netting provision to apply.
Justify why different TINs count as the same taxpayer. This one's definitely a bit of a head-scratcher, but as you said, incredibly powerful if it applies. It's about netting out interest charges, which could save someone a lot of money if they've had a messy tax history with both overpayments and underpayments happening around the same time. It truly is like a tax credit for your interest payments.
It truly is, and it's an often underutilized provision, probably due to its complexity, but it can result in significant savings for those with the right kind of complex tax histories. Finally, let's briefly touch on a much more niche fee, the branded prescription drug fee.
Okay, this sounds very specific.
It is the scenario. This is specifically for claiming a refund for this very particular type of annual fee imposed on certain manufacturers and importers of branded prescription drugs. Highly specialized, relevant only to certain pharmaceutical companies.
So not for the average taxpayer. How do they request it if it applies?
How to request. On line 1, they enter the fee year, for example, 2023. On the beginning date, MMDDYYYY, just the year is needed. Complete line 2 with the exact refund amount they are claiming for that fee year. They'll skip line 3. On line 4, check the box for fee. On line 5, checkbox mem specifically for branded prescription drug BPD fee. They'll skip lines 6 and 7. On line 8, they need to identify the claim clearly as branded prescription drug fee and provide a detailed explanation for why they're claiming a refund of that fee.
Straightforward boxes for this one. What attachment?
Mandatory attachments. They must attach a copy of the Form 8947 report of branded prescription drug information that provided the basis for the fee calculation by the IRS for that year. They also need to include any additional information supporting the specific amount to be refunded, and they need to state whether they or anyone else has filed a previous claim for any amount covered by this current claim to prevent duplicate refunds.
Attach the original 8947 and explain the refund.
Yes. And one important note, fee claims for the branded prescription drug fee should not be combined with any other types of claims on the same Form 843. Keep it separate. Additionally, interest related to this specific branded prescription drug fee cannot be abated under the IRS error or delay provisions, Section 6404(8)(1 we discussed earlier. It highlights its unique nature and limited abatement options. #tag outro.
Wow, we really went deep on Form 843 today. It's crystal clear that while it's definitely not a form for your general tax filing or amendments, it's an incredibly powerful tool for these very specific situations where you might be due a refund or an abatement.
Hmm.
Understanding these precise applications is truly a form of tax saving, or maybe better put, money recovering knowledge.
Absolutely. I think the core insight here is the importance of understanding the specific purpose of every IRS form. Don't just assume one size fits all.
Right.
Form 843 is a testament to the fact that even seemingly minor overpayments or those penalty assessments that feel wrong can often be challenged and resolved. But, and this is the key, only if you use the right tool for the job and follow the specific instructions.
Knowledge is most valuable when understood and applied.
Exactly. And this form, with its very detailed instructions, provides that exact pathway to recovering what might rightfully be yours if you fit one of those specific scenarios.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? It means the next time you get an IRS notice assessing a penalty or interest seems too high, or you realize there might have been an error in a specific type of payment or assessment like that excess Social Security withholding, or maybe an IRS-caused delay that racked up interest, don't automatically assume it's set in stone. Don't just sign and pay it. Take a moment. Pull up the instructions for Form 843 online. They're easy to find on irs.gov. See if your situation fits one of these specific scenarios we've discussed today.
It's worth that check.
It really is. It could genuinely lead to significant funds being returned to you or penalties being waived, putting money back in your pocket where it belongs.
And remember, while we've laid out the roadmap here and unpacked the specific pathways to relief detailed in the instructions, if your situation feels particularly complex, or if you're dealing with substantial amounts of money,
Yeah.
considering professional advice from a qualified tax pro, a CPA, an EA, a tax attorney is always a wise step. Critical thinking is essential in this world of information overload, and sometimes that means knowing when your situation requires an expert opinion to help navigate these intricate forms and regulations effectively.
Precisely. Don't be afraid to ask for help when the stakes are high or the rules get murky. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the surprisingly useful Form 843.
My pleasure.
We hope this has given you a newfound appreciation for the detailed pathways available within the tax system to potentially reclaim what's rightfully yours. Until next time, stay curious and keep digging for those valuable insights.